Jenny Grant, come on up, Jenny, and Shelby Stephenson himself, ladies and gentlemen, and Mike Wiley himself. Come on up, you guys.
And I'd like her to tell you a little bit about what that is and why we might decide that she'd be the perfect moderator for this panel. Jenny, maybe you tell them why. But we are so excited you're here, and thank you so much for graciously joining us this evening. Again, make sure you take time to see the Benson Museum of Local History. Check out our slides in the back. And don't forget to fill out your surveys. Enjoy your food, everybody. There may be more banana puddings if you missed one. All right, I'm handing up. Now enunciate, guys.
Well, good evening, everyone. As I mentioned, my name is Jenny Grant. I'm with the North Carolina Rural Center. For those of you who aren't as familiar with our work, we're a 32-year-old organization. We're a nonprofit focused on improving the lives of rural North Carolinians through leadership, capacity building, advocacy, and small business development. So we represent 80 counties in North Carolina that we consider rural, which we define as any county that has a population of 250 people or less per square mile. So the majority of North Carolina is rural, and we're very excited to be here and very excited to talk with both Shelby and Mike this evening. So I would just like to first welcome these two gentlemen to the stage, and then I will have you both just introduce yourself and just tell us a little story about yourself.
Thank you, Jenny. My name is Shelby Dean Stephenson. My mother wanted a girl. I was named for Shelby Jean Davis, the hillbilly girl singer who later married Bill Russo, who was doing composing for Stan Kenton. Anyway, here I am.
I will say that my name is Mike Wiley, and I just want to make a quick say thank you very much for your words. I'm originally from Southwest Virginia, Roanoke, which is the nickname the Star City of the South. And much of my work comes out of my upbringing and the family around me, specifically my grandmother, who is 92 years young today, and a lot of who I am comes out of our history and my family's history, and doing things that are very similar to or have connections to what Shelby has so eloquently put in MAYTLE'S WORLD. You know, things that were not just specific to me, but to people across the South, snapping peas on the porch on Sunday afternoon. Those kinds of things that make my world and MAYTLE'S world so very similar. So I just wanted to say thank you very much before we get into any of the details, but thank you very much for all.
Jenny, what is rural? It was rural when I was born in 1938. The road was dirt and stone. You get that feeling. And childhood is probably everything. But now, McGee's Crossroads is a gateway to the Research Triangle, where I'm from. And instead of crops, we're farming houses. So what? Could you comment about this? You mentioned these rural counties. Is Robinson one of them?
Yes.
Is Johnston still one?
Johnston is hanging on there as a rural county, but you can definitely see with the expansion of people migrating to the urban areas that some of the surrounding counties are turning more suburban than rural. But definitely there's still a lot of small towns in North Carolina. North Carolina this is where we're in one right now. A fun fact we have more small towns than almost every other state in the United States, with the exception of Pennsylvania. So only Pennsylvania has more small towns than North Carolina.
Mike, when you were growing up in Southwest Virginia, Roanoke, did you go to movies? I went to saw my first movie when I was 14. You know, my father, you get the idea. I mean, and I never got over that. It was, so you didn't grow up in what's called an urban setting?
No, I did, because Roanoke is an urban setting. It's, you know, at that time it was probably one of, or the smaller but still larger cities in Southwest Virginia. You had Northern Virginia, which is kind of, you know, even though you've got all that population up there, it's all kind of one big city, in a sense, one big traffic jam, really. You've got, you know, the Tidewater area, which again, you know, and so Southwest Virginia, Roanoke, and points after, Roanoke would be the, I don't know if any of you all from Southwest Virginia, but Roanoke would be would be the larger city, and the largest city, in a sense, about the same size as Lynchburg. And then you get into Blacksburg and Wise and Wytheville, and it just gets smaller as you get closer to Tennessee. But because our family, and because Roanoke has such, especially the African Americans in Roanoke, have such ties to places like Galax and Franklin County and Stanton, Virginia, and any number of places around that area, which are all like Benson. They're all still, to this day, small towns. Vinton, Virginia, they're all small towns. We all have those connections, so we all still have relatives in those areas. So we all still go back to those areas or have memories of those areas. So many of us, especially again African Americans, have memories of on a Sunday going to church, but also going to the flea market, right? But also going to yard sales on Saturdays, and also spending time with relatives that lived on farms or in rural areas, deeper in Southwest Virginia or outer areas like Central Virginia. So it's all very similar to me, and all speaks to me in a way that that flourishes and flowers memories in my head.
The reason I ask is my bad joke is I was born under a collard leaf, you know. and then I wanted to be born in a museum for a while. And I realized I probably was 30, 31 or 2 before I realized that I had to carry all that past, all that is never gone. You understand? The history and all of that. And I still write out of that and try to get straight without being too didactic. Our bargain with history, and slavery and all that, you know. There's 17 unmarked grave slaves across the road where Ned and I live today. So it's not memory, but I've had to research some of that. I'm digressing, and I don't want to, Jenny.
Well, something that Mike just said, I think, is very interesting when we think about the urban-rural divide, and people often mention the urban-rural divide, and really what North Carolina is, and what many states are, is it's a state of country cousins and city cousins, and we're not that removed from these rural places. And I would just be interested to hear each of your thoughts about how you feel that your works are similar, and in what ways are they different, since they both take place in rural versus urban areas.
Okay, I saw my son and I drove in the rain, by the way, and got in, bless the rain, and saw Peace, P-E-A-C-E, of Clay, all right? And the mother, based on maybe the grandmother you mentioned or not?
In ways, Dean is the mother and the matriarch in our piece, based on my grandmother, my mother, and the other women that raised myself, as well as Howard Kraft, my co-playwright in the piece, but certainly so my grandmother and her strength.
Yeah. Now, what was your question?
Well, actually, a quick show of hands. How many people in the room have seen Piece of Clay? Okay, so a good number. So I'm interested in Shelby, your thoughts on Piece of Clay and some of the parallels that you find between his work and yours.
Well, the strength of the mother, Clay, right, this is the real world we live in. This place is called the Broad Slab Distillery. I grew up, you know, my father said never would buy what he called government whiskey, right? So we never said bootlegger, but we would go to Mr. Percy Flowers' store and get, you know, this peach brandy, and he'd love to shake the jar and say, look at those beets. Right, and so I could never forget that. And I loved, I mean, I know Clay went through what every people in this room go through in their families with, now the word is opioids, right? And whiskey and all of that. And the mother was the strong person there. And the father was the person who was, help me out.
No.
The mother was, you know, the guy who was trying to not ask the person for a date, but he never could. She was in charge, is what I'm saying.
Indeed, and Bumry, who was her boyfriend, who wanted to be her husband and wants to be her husband, but she still has memories, much in the same way as your piece. Maytel is in memory. In this piece, her husband, who had passed away, was in a truck accident when Clay was 10, is in memory. We don't hear Leon speak, but his presence is there because he is such a deep part of Dean's memory and her inability to move on and move past his death, even though it's been nearly 10 years since his passing. But she still looks to his pictures, she still looks to his influence, she still sees him in her son Clay, and it makes it difficult to move to a place where she can become a deep part of her boyfriend Bumry's life. And
how does the bank play a part? Remember that scene?
Oh yes. Well, Bumry himself, who partially is trying to move up in the world. Part of the reason is that he wants to move up as a person of color. He wants to move up as just a black man living in America, looking for that American dream. But he also wants to bring Clay and Dean, especially Dean, out of these projects to a new place, to a new world, another hierarchy. And so therefore he's trying to get a loan from the bank to be able to have his own business, to be able to have his own contracting or painting business. And the bank denies his loan. And even though he's got all the ducks that he needs in a row, but oddly enough, he doesn't have enough debt. He doesn't have enough experience in getting loans for the bank to give him a loan. So it sends his spirits into a tailspin.
I can relate to that, and I hope I can get through this and make some sense. My father's bank was the Bank of Four Oaks. And some of you know about the Bank of Four Oaks. And I showed Preston Martin and a few others in this room today my father's desk. He would put the bills and things on a piece of baling wire, Mike, and behind the pantry in the little kitchen, you know, this three-room shanty. Now, what am I trying to say? And my mother saved, you mentioned I got her a job, solicitor for the Smithfield Herald, and she did it for over 30 years, and she saved up $4,000 and put in a sock. This sounds, I know, like made up, but it's not, in the bureau drawer. And she took it out because she thought she would be tempted to give it to my father or spend it, and put it in a mason jar and buried it under a pecan tree. And one time she raised the little shovel off this hole, and there was a copperhead in there, you know. But I'm telling you this because it's not that my father didn't trust banks, but he lived from fall to fall, borrowed money to buy the fertilizer and to pay it off. And the tenants, black and white, who lived in this really, what is the word when the balconies with the porches have filigree and it's little scrolls and things. But he wanted to.
I'm not good with words. I don't know.
Move to the side of the road, you know, so we could have a mailbox. And so this plank house that I was born in and lived in for 14 years took one bath a week, you know, in a tub, and there was no money, so it was a small farm, and the tenants, my mother would cook for, and of course they couldn't come in. I don't remember the blacks or whites coming in, but she would talk to them through the screen, which certainly symbolizes to me or draws attention to the long history that we have to live with. The separate but equal. The Brown versus Board in 54. And right on up until now, that whole thing, and I wonder if it's too far back to imagine from slavery and the kind of non-freedom that happened with Reconstruction. I mean, that's all in how I feel, and I can't find words for it, so I try to get close to whatever a poem is. Please respond.
Two things. The what you're just talking about, which I will say first, it reminds me of in Tim Tyson's, you know, Tim Tyson wrote Blood Inside My Name. I adapted his book, Blood Inside My Name. I adapted his book, you know, play by the same name, which I did at Theater Raleigh a couple of years ago. But he says in that book, and I think this hits on the nail when you talk about your mother speaking through a screen, right? It is that folks in the South, specifically white folks in the South, didn't discuss the Jim Crow laws and those things. They didn't call them Jim Crow laws. They didn't call them Jim Crow laws because they could no more discuss it than a fish. And he says this quote: "A fish could discuss the wetness of water because it was so much a part of life So many folks that I've interviewed over the years, white folks that I've interviewed over the years, can't necessarily talk about racism. They say, well, it's just the way it was. Because it's like asking a fish to discuss the wetness of water. It's what you swim through. It's a part of you. It's what you live and breathe. And so therefore, it's not necessarily something that you can put your finger on, right? So I think of that. But then to talk about what you talk about at first, the banks and things of that nature, I don't bring that, we don't talk about that in Clay, but it's certainly an experience and part of the backstory and, again, the water that those folks swim in because, you know, going to, just the other day, I was in a Sheetz, and it just, in this moment in this Sheetz gas station, reminded me of my childhood, and it may remind some of you all of your childhood in a sense, because the woman who was working the cash register said to the woman that was in front of me, well, that's going to be, let's say she said, that's going to be $10.20. Well, the woman paused for a second, this African-American woman, she paused for a second, she looks back at me, and then she goes, and reaches down in the bank up brassiere, and pulls out what this woman needs. And it reminded me of the many times I had seen my mother reach into the bank of brassiere and pull out what the cash register, you know, what the person at the register need, and or my grandmother doing the very same thing. Not that they didn't necessarily trust banks, but the bank of brassiere was always right there.
Well, we have about 10 minutes left, so I wanted to quickly open it up to the floor. If anyone has any specific questions for either Mike or Shelby, please raise your hand and we can have it addressed.
Mike has the answers.
Well, I know what I'm curious about is how you both came to be playwrights. What was kind of the genesis of how you got to find your craft?
Gosh, I'm glad you asked that question.
Whew.
I guess mine is mostly language, but here is how that happened. I had a manuscript called MAYTLE'S WORLD, and you heard some of the poetry read so beautifully today by Paul and by Tommy and Heather Shore. And I showed it to, there's an if here, she would be here if the storms hadn't come. Ann Russell, Ann with an E, from Wilmington. Anybody know of Ann Russell? Thank you. I let her and her husband, architect, Howard Garris, read it. And Ann said, Shelby, you could turn this into a play. And the first thing I thought about was, God, no. I didn't sleep that night. I thought, I've got to think, there's all those words, conflict and whatever. And there was so much in the way I grew up. I just had to, dream it out. But anyway, she came, I woke up, we met on Paul's Hill, and I said, Ann, I can do it. And I split up the poems and gave my father literally what you heard today, those words, and my brother Paul Jr., whose son Andy brought the barbecue tonight for us to eat. and me, Shelby. And so that is how it happened. And in July of 2015, the Big Dog Theater in Wilmington did it for a couple of weeks. And I went and I thought, they performed it. And Shub had a kind of book, and the character did, and the play came out of, he was sort of the main character. But I think I've answered that, but it would not have happened if it hadn't been for Ann Russell. I don't have a reason. I love words. We can't say what we want to say, but we can try, and the words find things we want to say. And so, that's how it happened. I love the sounds of words and music. I don't have anything to say, and you could hear that today.
He stole my answer. No. I mean, it's all that, and for me, it's gonna sound strange, but I love yard sales. I love antiquing and thumbing my way through picking my way through old attics and things of that nature. I also love to cook. And so those two loves of mine, you know, not particularly looking at recipes, because I'm not very good at that, because I'm not great at measurements, but figuring out what I want to create and knowing that it needs a dash of this and a pinch of this, and somewhere along the way, at some point, I'll have something really great or really salty. Either is going to be an experience, right? And the same goes for picking my way through a room full of antiques. I just love stories and putting stories together and words. And so therefore, when I go into a room full of either antiques or a yard sale, I'm looking at the stories that this item might hold. And that's how I create my work, is I think about the stories that individuals, I look out at a room, or I think about my past, you know, especially when you say things like, you know, it was a shanty. You know, I think about the house that I grew up in, which was a house that my grandfather built, my great-grandfather built, and it wasn't the kind of house that you think was, you know, it wasn't terra, it was a shanty, kind of a place that I'm sure that he'd hoped was just a stopping point on the way to somewhere bigger and somewhere better, but it wasn't, and it wasn't for another generation or so. But it's the stories that come out of that home and that experience, and you know, going home with a skeleton key to open my front door when everyone else had a traditional modern day key. I had a skeleton key, but that's a story. There's a story in that, yes. Right? I don't dismiss it, or I don't hide it. I think, there's a story in that I can one day bring out. So all of those things combined are why I became a playwright. Also, you know, I'm an actor, so it's easier to employ myself than it is to ask other people to be in my work. So that's another reason that I have to write.
Well, I know that we could definitely talk all night, but I believe there is a bus that is leaving that we need to be. we need to be.
We just got warmed up.
I know.
You think we'll survive Apex and Durham and Raleigh and Garner and everything? You being an expert on what's rural and what's urban?
We will. I believe as long as we can find our commonalities and we can stay true to our roots and make sure that we're telling the stories.
Do you know what the answer is?
What is it?
L-O-V-E. Try to be a human being. This is all.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to thank everyone here. I'd like to thank Shelby, Stephenson, and Mike. Thank you so much. We enjoyed having you here, and we hope don't miss the bus. Thank you.